The bar exam is one of the last things you have to do in just about any state in the United States to become a practicing attorney. By the time you actually sit down for the bar exam, you'll have already had years of undergrad behind you, years of law school behind you, and then many hours after law school in actually studying for this thing. In this video, I want to share my experience in studying for the bar exam and ultimately passing it just a couple months ago, so I want to get this video out there now while it's still fresh in my mind and I can actually create a decent resource for someone who might be just starting the bar exam review process, or maybe you got a few years ahead of you before you actually do this thing. Or maybe you don't have any plans to take the bar exam ever and you're just curious for what the process actually looks like. But before I get into that, just want to introduce myself for anyone who is new to the channel. My name is Jack Duffley and I'm a 24-year-old real estate investor and now a licensed attorney, and I'll be practicing real estate law in the coming weeks full-time. On this channel, I cover a variety of topics as they have to do with investing and personal finance. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel. And if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. So what does studying for the bar exam look like? What does that process actually like? Well, let's set out a timeline first. We'll say you're in your final 2 semesters, your final semester of your 3L year, your final year of law school. Typically, that would mean you're graduating sometime in May, and then you're taking the bar exam in July if you're taking it right away out of law school, since it's administered 2 times per year, generally speaking, once in July and another time in February. I personally took the February bar exam since I graduated in December, but the process looks largely the same. I just had more excuse to stay inside all day studying because it was cold out.
Nice.
But the point is, you're going to have something like 2 to 3 months between actually graduating law school and then going to take the bar exam if you take it right away out of school. This is the time window that most people deal with, and that's the one I dealt with as well. So you have your couple months to study. What does the actual bar exam look like? What are you studying for? I'll give a very high-level overview of the uniform bar exam, which is the bar exam that most states use. They might tweak it in some slight ways, as I'll mention, but the uniform bar exam is split up into 3 distinct sections. One of those is the multi-state performance test, which is an essay part of the exam, and it's not one you can really study for very easily, since the way that these problems work is that they give you a set of facts, but they also give you a set of laws, and this is a closed universe, so you can't bring in your own knowledge into this necessarily. You are just using the closed universe of facts and law, so you have to apply the law to those facts, and it's very straightforward in that way. Hopefully you've learned how to do that in law school, so it's a skill that should already be kind of set. That's kind of the whole purpose of law school, is being able to do this basic legal analysis, and following directions, most importantly, is really what this is testing. You can't really study for it, since it's not as though learning extra laws will help you here, since the laws are given to you. But anyways, that's one section. The next section is the multi-state essay examination, the MEE for short. This is another essay part of the exam, but this one does require you to bring a lot of substantive law knowledge to the table. This will be a number of short essay questions, which will give you some set of facts that you have to follow, but it's not going to give you the law. You have to recall the law on your own. So this one requires a lot more studying, since you can actually study for it, and you have to study for it to actually understand what laws to apply to a given set of facts. They're not given to you like they are in the MPT. Here are all of the topics that could potentially come on to an MEE question, or multiple questions, since they can sometimes mix and match topics. But you have agency and partnerships, civil procedure, conflict of laws, constitutional law, contracts, corporations and LLCs, criminal law, evidence, family law, real property, secure transactions, torts, trust and estates, and wills. Needless to say, that is a lot of different potential topics that might come up on the MEE that you're going to have to know. But after the MEE, you are done with essays and you move on to the MBE, the multi-state bar examination. And this is all multiple choice, and it makes up about half the test for most states. These naturally are much shorter questions, but they're still plenty difficult, since they will often give you a lot of gotcha answers that might be very hard to identify, so it takes a lot of practice to get these down. But here are the topics that can come up on the MBE. It thankfully is less than the MEE, and it's all overlapping as well. But the MBE topics are civil procedure, constitutional law, contracts, criminal law, evidence, real property, and torts. So those topics are kind of the big topics that you're going to want to focus on first, because they show up on both the MBE and could show up on the MEE as well, and often do. And a big way that uniform bar exam states will differ in their examinations is in how many MPTs they have on the test. So the MPT is that first one, that multi-state performance test, the one that you can't really study for, I don't think. Some states will have 1 of those, others will have 2. Illinois was the state where I took the bar, and they had 2. But be aware that states, even though they're following following this uniform examination. They might have nuances like that. They might have supplemental sections to the test based on specific state law, but otherwise the UB material is going to be the same for every state. And if you want to see a more detailed breakdown on how the test is actually structured, you can go ahead and check out a blog article I wrote a little while ago going over my experience with the bar exam itself and the virtual bar exam in particular, but I explained the test structure in a lot greater detail, so I'll include that link in the description below. So obviously that's a ton of material, and in many cases you might have taken one course on it in your first year, maybe your second year, maybe even your third year, but still it seems like it was so long ago that you might not actually remember the information from it, and even if you do, there might be big gaps because your professor didn't cover something in great detail, or maybe something is just slightly different than what's on the actual bar exam, since every professor can have nuances in how they teach a subject. So just because you took a class on it doesn't mean you're going to be ready for the bar for it. But the way that many, if not most people study for the bar exam is by taking some sort of course that provides a pretty rigid structure in how you actually study for the test, so you make sure that you can actually cover all the bases. I'm not saying a course is mandatory, though I definitely would recommend it. I took a course. I took the Barbri course, which I think is the most popular one. I'm not sure, since there's a couple big ones. I can't say whether it's better or worse than other courses, since it's the only course I've taken, but I'll explain my experience with the Barbri course in case you're curious. The course I took was entirely virtual. I think they offer in-person lectures as well, or at least normally do. They didn't in my year, I don't think. Either way, I did the fully virtual one where you could actually go at your own pace, but the course generally has 3 distinct sets of resources. The first one of those is video lectures. The next would be print resources and books, which you can also get digitally, and the third is practice problems and questions. Barbri at least creates an outline that you're supposed to follow, where it'll tell you when to watch something, it'll tell you when to read something, and it'll tell you when to actually practice or do something, so you don't really have to create a study plan yourself. However, I found as I actually worked through the course, I started altering it pretty significantly based on what I was struggling with, since I don't really know what I'm really bad at until I start doing a lot of practice. And there is so much material to cover here. We're talking about at least 300, more like 400 hours of stuff to get through, if not more if you want to do extra practice, which certainly wouldn't hurt. And if you're doing the course over 2 or 2.5 months, you're really adopting a full-time job here to study. It can be very easy to fall behind in the course or just in general bar prep just because of how much material there is to cover. One thing that was nice about the Barbri course is that pretty early on, in about the first third or definitely before the halfway point in the course, there is a diagnostic exam. And this exam mimics the entire multiple choice part of the uniform bar exam, so you get a really good feel for what sections you're lacking in, and it'll give you a detailed report on what areas you should probably study for. Before you actually take this diagnostic exam, you will have gone through many, if not all, of the video lectures. That's what I did, so I knew I had at least a base level of knowledge and some refreshers, so I wasn't going in completely blind into this. So after I did that, I took this diagnostic exam, and then that is what determined how I structured the rest of my study plan. I'll get back to that in just a second, but I want to tell you what my actual day looked like when I was studying for the bar exam, especially in my second month, so my last month before I actually took the test. For reference, I was doing some very part-time work for law firms where I was writing blog articles. I've talked about it on the channel before, but that was probably about 10 to 15 hours a week, and I was also spending at least 10, if not 15 hours a week on the YouTube channel as well, so I kind of had about 20 to 25 hours per week set aside for my job and my YouTube channel at the time. I can't say I'd recommend working a full-time job while also trying to do bar prep. It's just a lot of things to juggle, and you're probably going to suffer in one of them. You're either not going to do a great job at your job, or you're not going to do a great job on the bar prep, at least in that last month where you really got to buckle down. Because it ends up being around 30 hours a week, if not much more, to actually spend time studying for this test. Because it essentially becomes a full-time job to study for the test itself. I was probably spending between 30 to 50 hours a week towards the latter weeks just on bar prep. So it was very time intensive, and I was working on it every single day. And even putting in all that time, you're never going to feel like you're totally ready for the test because it's just so much material. You're never going to be an expert on everything, but the point is you just want to get that passing score. You want to know a little bit about everything so you can at least be mostly ready for everything. Because even if you're a total expert on one section, that section might not even show up on the MEE, the essay exam. And then you might be totally lacking in a section that does show up, and then you're missing out on all those points. And if you just studied at least a little bit more for that one section that you were not that great with, you might have been able to get a lot more points on the table. But thankfully, you don't need to be a total expert to actually pass the exam, which leads me to some of my takeaways from actually studying for this thing. The first thing I would highly recommend doing is starting as early as possible, even if that means towards the end of your final semester of law school. If you could start in those final weeks of law school, maybe just focusing on one particular section just to kind of start refreshing and get in the routine of studying for the bar exam, that will not hurt you in any way. Of course, don't go overboard to where your grades suffer in your final semester of law school, since that's not really going to help you either. But even if it's just studying for the bar for 1 to 2 hours a day right before you graduate law school, that's a nice little head start. You can start getting the cobwebs dusted off on subjects you might be rusty on, and also just start to understand what this test actually is like, since that's an adjustment in itself. The questions might be pretty similar to what you've been dealing with in law school, but it's just getting used to the structure of the test, the pacing, all that stuff takes some time to get used to. And another thing I think people should understand is that the first month or so is probably going to be spent learning how to study for the test, so that in your second month, you can actually study for it effectively. Since it's just an adjustment you have to get used to, you got to cover lots of basic material to actually have something to go off of, so you know what to really focus on in your second month, which leads me into the next tip, which is to really focus on those weak areas. Don't try to become a master of everything. Go for the low-hanging fruit. The things you don't know anything about, go study those so you know a little bit about them, because some is a lot better than none, because at least you can fudge your way through some answers, get some points for sure, and then maybe you're just a little bit closer to actually getting a really strong answer on a particular question. It's a lot easier to go from 0 to 50 than 50 to 100 in a particular topic. This is where the Barbri Diagnostic exam was really helpful, since it showed me the sections where I could really focus most of my energy on for the greatest gain. And when it came to focusing on those sections, Barbri actually has this really handy mini review book. It's called the Convisor Mini Review, but it's really a thorough outline of every single subject out there, and it's broken down by subsection within the topic. So for a particular section of civil procedure, let's say, I could go to that specific section and I would actually copy down the outline word for word by hand to try and memorize that part of the outline and memorize some of those rules so that I could easily recall them. That practice of actually writing down the rules and then reviewing those notes that I wrote down day after day to really lock it in was probably the most helpful thing I did compared to all the other things. Not that the other things weren't important by any means, but that was super effective for catching myself up on those areas that I wasn't great in. Because a huge part of the bar is memorization, so the more you can do to memorize certain topics, whether that's flashcards, whether that's writing things down like I was and then reviewing them after the fact, or both, whatever works for you for memorizing probably is going to be very helpful for the bar exam, since there's just so many rules to memorize. Another thing to make sure to do, which pretty much every course should allow you to do, is to take many practice problems, since you want to get those repetitions in, build your endurance, see if there's problem areas that keep coming up and you want to start memorizing those areas in particular. Taking practice problems once you've learned about the basics of an actual subject is the best way to identify those areas and to really lock in certain concepts, because you're seeing them in a way that'll be very similar, if not the exact same, to how you'll actually see them on the test. And my final word of advice for anyone who's about to start studying for the bar exam is to just put your head down and study. It's going to be a grind. It's going to be a long couple months, or maybe many months if you're doing a prolonged sort of study session, but the point is you just got to start studying. You got to figure out what you're good at, what you're bad at, and then focus on what you're bad at while touching up what you're good on, of course. But it's a lot of material to review, so probably one of the best things you can do is just to get started and figure out what works. But if you put in the work and really focus your efforts towards improvement and trying to figure out what areas you're struggling with and actually getting better at those, and then maintaining the ones you're pretty decent at, you're going to be well on your way towards passing the bar exam. It's definitely intimidating, but it's super doable. You just have to put in the work. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And if you want to see content about investing and personal finance, that's the bulk of what I cover on this channel. So if you're interested in that sort of stuff, be sure to have a look around the channel. And as I mentioned earlier, be sure to subscribe. But until next time, take care.